Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine looking at the news from June 4th, 2025. It wasn't just, one big story.
No, not at all.
It was more like a rapid-fire snapshot of a really complex day. We saw huge budget numbers coming out of Washington, alongside these stark reversals on healthcare guidance.
Right. And really personal stories, too. Individuals kind of battling the system.
Exactly. And challenges to people speaking out, and even like surprising stuff from the natural world. It
Yeah.
felt like a window into policy shifts, personal battles, environmental insights, global events, all sort of colliding.
Absolutely. June 4th served up a truly diverse stack of information. It really highlighted how interconnected policy decisions are with their real world impacts
Yeah,
and the resilience of individuals, and even, like you said, the unexpected ways the environment fits in.
totally. So our mission today is to take this stack of sources, articles, reports, notes, and really dive deep. We're pulling out the most important nuggets, the key insights, the surprising facts, and trying to help you connect the dots.
Think of it as your shortcut.
Yeah, exactly. Your shortcut to being well-informed about what was actually happening on that specific day, June 4th, 2025.
We'll guide you through the material you shared, helping you understand what stands out and, well, why it matters, making sure you get the essentials without getting totally lost in the sheer volume.
Okay, let's jump right into the numbers then, starting with the economic landscape. Some pretty significant projections coming out of D.C.
Right. A major piece of news on June 4th was the new score from the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the CBO,
Uh-huh.
regarding President Trump's spending and tax cut bill.
And the projections here are quite large scale. The
Yeah.
CBO estimates this bill would add about $2.4 trillion to the federal deficit over the next decade.
That's a big number, and it's based on projections that the bill would reduce federal spending by roughly $1.3 trillion over that same period.
While cutting taxes by a significantly larger amount, $3.75 trillion over the decade. And the bulk of those cuts, I gather, are extending the 2017 tax stuff.
That's right. But what's particularly striking, I think, about the CBO score is the estimated impact on health coverage. They project changes to programs like Medicaid could leave. Well, the answer is nearly 11 million Americans uninsured by 2034.
Wow. So huge numbers on deficits and taxes, but also a very personal impact on healthcare. How did sources say Washington reacted to this score?
Well, the reporting indicated that House Republicans largely sort of shrugged off the CBO's findings.
Right.
They often point to, past CBO inaccuracies. And Representative Steve Scalise was quoted arguing that tax cuts actually spur economic growth in ways that maybe standard CBO models don't fully capture.
Uh-huh. The classic argument there. But on the other side, Senate Democratic leadership had a very different take, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer specifically warned of real-world consequences for healthcare access. He used that phrase, death by 1,000 paper cuts,
Right.
suggesting people would gradually lose coverage and just fall through the cracks.
Okay, so that's the CBO score on the spending and tax bill. But the CBO also released a separate analysis, right? Focused purely on the impact of existing tariff policies.
That's correct. Yeah, this looked at tariffs that were already in place, so before the very latest actions. And it projected a $2.8 trillion reduction in the deficit over a decade, potentially from increased revenue,
A deficit reduction.
Right.
But the flip side of that projection was higher inflation estimated to be an increase of 0.4% in both 2025 and 2026.
Right, and a shrinking economy.
So deficit reduction, maybe, but with potential downsides for growth and what people pay for things.
Exactly. And adding to this whole tariff picture, President Trump took action on June 4th to actually double the tariffs on aluminum and steel.
Doubling the rate from
Oh.
25% up to 50%, that's a big jump. What was the rationale the administration gave, according to the sources?
Several reasons were cited. It's framed as, part of ongoing trade negotiations, maybe leverage.
Mm-hmm.
The announcement was made in Pittsburgh, which is obviously symbolically important for steel, but the core rationale offered is tax collection and protecting or growing the domestic American steel and aluminum industry.
Okay. We also got some perspective on this from Babak Hafezi, adjunct professor at American University, CEO of Hafezi Capital. What was his main takeaway?
Well, Hafezi acknowledged the administration might be partially right, that these tariffs could support a certain level of domestic jobs. That part, maybe.
Okay.
However, he argued that the ultimate effect is making American companies uncompetitive globally.
Why? Because of the cost.
Exactly, because the tariffs drive up the price of American steel, often making it the most expensive in the
He
world.
put it pretty bluntly, didn't he?
Yeah.
Saying it allows inefficient businesses to be afloat longer.
He did. And he really stressed the negative impact on international relations, noting it makes trading partners very angry. And they're likely to retaliate or just find ways to circumvent the tariffs. Maybe using countries with lower rates, like the UK, which has a 25% rate, as a kind of transfer point.
Interesting. What about the general feeling he's getting from businesses around the world?
Hafezi reported just widespread frustration. Business leaders globally are very upset about the instability, all the volatility.
Yeah, I can imagine.
He said they're stuck just reacting rather than actually strategizing. Because the rules, the policies, they can change within weeks. That kind of uncertainty makes long-term planning almost impossible.
So putting his points together, maybe some limited domestic job support, but the bigger picture he paints is lost global competitiveness, angry trading partners, and damaging instability for businesses.
That sums up his analysis pretty well based on the sources. And looking ahead, what does Hafezi predict based on these trends?
He expects to see a decrease in GDP and also growth shrinking over the next year or two. And he also thinks the tariffs themselves will eventually bring in a smaller portion of the dollar value than maybe projected initially as, trade patterns shift and companies find other ways.
So the economic picture from June 4th's news, it's really complex. Budget projections with huge impacts, tariff policies with really debated effects on deficits, inflation, growth, global competition.
Right. And leaving the purely economic numbers behind for a moment, June 4th news also showed us how government actions can hit very close to home for individuals, for communities.
Yeah, one major policy shift reported was the Trump administration rescinding that Biden-era federal guidance about emergency abortions in hospitals that get Medicare funding.
The EMTALA guidance, that's the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, passed way back in '86, originally to stop hospitals turning away emergency patients just because they didn't have insurance.
Right. And then post-Dobbs, the Biden administration issued guidance interpreting EMTALA to mean that these hospitals had to provide an abortion if it was necessary to stabilize a woman's life in an emergency, even in states with strict bans.
Okay, so by rescinding that guidance letter, the Trump administration is essentially removing that specific interpretation.
Exactly. It leaves hospitals to kind of figure out the conflict between state bans and federal emergency care rules on their own.
Which states are particularly affected by this, according to what we read?
The reporting highlighted states where current laws have no exception for the health of the pregnant woman. Places like Arkansas, Idaho, Mississippi, Oklahoma, South Dakota.
It's worth noting, though, sources also reported that even with the Biden guidance in place,
Yeah.
investigative reports had already found instances where women were turned away or harmed or even died because they didn't get necessary emergency care.
Right, which just shows how complex and challenging the situation already was with all the different state laws.
And how did different groups react to this specific rescission?
Well, anti-abortion groups were reported as celebrating the decision. They argued that state laws already allow for necessary emergency care and that the Biden guidance was, an overreach.
This decision was also specifically mentioned as being outlined in Project 2025. For listeners who might not know, what exactly is Project 2025?
Project 2025 is this comprehensive policy blueprint. It was put together by conservative think tanks and organizations, basically outlining plans for a potential future conservative administration across all sorts of government areas.
Okay. And what other related actions did the sources say Project 2025 calls for in this area, besides rescinding the guidance?
Well, it calls for the administration to stop defending existing EMTALA lawsuits that challenge state abortion bans, and the sources reported that's actually already happened.
I see.
It also includes calls for things like potentially creating a national abortion surveillance program, reversing the FDA's approval of the abortion pill mifepristone, and enforcing the Comstock Act.
The Comstock Act, that's another one that might be unfamiliar. What is that?
It's actually a really old federal law, anti-obscenity law from the late 1800s.
Wow.
Yeah, and some people interpret its language as prohibiting the mailing of anything related to abortion, nationwide, so enforcing it could seriously impact access to medication abortion, even in states where it's currently legal.
Okay, so that's a huge potential impact. Shifting from those policy changes, we also saw some deeply personal stories about immigration in the headlines. We heard the really powerful account of Zumina Arias Cristobal.
Yes, Simina, she's a 19-year-old college student in Georgia. She was detained by ICE after what was described as a mistaken traffic stop.
Despite living in the U.S. since she was just 4 years old.
Right. And her story is just, yeah, heart-wrenching. She talked about being very fearful for her future, feeling like being in college didn't offer any real protection. She described detention as life-altering, like a prison, said it stripped away basic human rights and her dignity.
And her father's in a similar situation too, right?
Sadly, yes. Facing deportation, detained at the same facility. She mentioned her family's using counseling just to cope with the enormous stress.
She talked about the lasting impact too, saying she feels unable to go back to simple things like running or socializing, just living with that same fear immigrants have to live with now.
And she highlighted the environment of fear and caution in her community, which has a large Hispanic population. People are super aware and taking precaution, she said.
But amidst all that fear, she also shared this really powerful message about the support she got from her community, calling it overwhelming and absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And saying that support was a key reason she wanted to share her story and raise awareness.
It's such a stark reminder of how these big policy debates translate into immediate, profound personal crises for people.
Absolutely. And speaking of immigration cases, sources also briefly mentioned a federal judge's order blocking the deportation of the wife and 5 children of Mohammed Sabri Solomon. He's the one charged in that firebomb attack in Boulder, Colorado.
Right. They were taken into IC custody, being processed for removal. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said DHS is investigating if the family knew about or provided support for the attack.
But the reporting made it really clear that the family members themselves have not been charged with any crime.
Correct. The judge's order was about ensuring their constitutional rights were upheld during the process.
So these stories together really underscore the significant individual impact of government actions and policies around immigration.
Definitely.
Okay, moving on from those personal impacts. The news on June 4th also highlighted some moments where individuals were sort of pushing back against systems of power, touching on themes like accountability and the freedom of speech.
Yeah, a significant example is the action taken against Miles Taylor.
Right. Miles Taylor, former chief of staff at DHS. He's the one who wrote that anonymous op-ed criticizing President Trump, then later revealed who he was.
Exactly. And on June 4th, sources reported President Trump issued an executive order revoking Taylor's security clearance and accusing him of treason in disclosing sensitive information.
Wow, treason. That's strong language.
Very strong. And Taylor's response was immediate. He called the order Orwellian.
Oh, okay.
He firmly stated that criticism of a president is not classified and pointed out what he called the deep irony, given President Trump's own legal issues with classified documents.
Instead of just, accepting it or filing a lawsuit, he took a different route. He filed a request with the inspectors general at DOJ and DHS.
Right, asking them to investigate the executive order itself, arguing it was unconstitutional.
Why did he decide to step up now, do you think? Sources said he was advised to lay low.
His motivation seems rooted in principle. He felt it was bigger than me and my family. He saw it as a direct attack on free speech. And he stated he wanted to test whether that guardrail is still there, the norms protecting public servants from political retaliation.
He also talked openly about the personal and financial toll this is taking. His wife having to go back to work, worrying about keeping their home.
Yeah, potential legal costs. And he expressed concern for others who might be targeted in the future but don't have the same resources or support network he does.
He also had an interesting thought on why some people might seem unconcerned about threats to democracy, suggesting that unless it affects you personally, it's easier to justify looking the other way.
That's a sobering point. He also believes anonymity or self-censorship are actually bigger threats to free speech than the president himself. Expressing regret he didn't unmask sooner.
His experience kind of echoes concerns raised by another voice in the news that day, Greg Rosen.
Ah, yes. Greg Rosen, he was a lead prosecutor at the Justice Department working on the January 6th investigation, secured hundreds of convictions.
Right. And he issued a warning specifically about President Trump, talking about potentially issuing sweeping pardons for January 6th rioters.
Rosen's view, basically, is that pardoning those involved sends a message that political violence is acceptable.
And undermines the rule of law.
Exactly, a fundamental principle. He described the work his team did as Herculean and righteous, really standing by their efforts.
But according to the reporting, after talk of pardons became prominent, his specific section at DOJ was shut down, and he was demoted.
Yeah. And this outcome led Rosen to worry about a brain drain at DOJ and about attacks on dedicated career law enforcement professionals.
He called the perceived retaliation ridiculous.
Right. Said it politicizes, or the word weaponize, the justice system, sending a terrible message about the consequences of doing your job in politically sensitive cases.
So these two stories from different parts of the government really raised significant questions reported that day about accountability, about the pressure individuals face within the system.
Absolutely. They're powerful examples of people grappling with what they see as attacks on fundamental principles.
Okay. Moving from those political and legal challenges, June 4th also brought us news from a very different arena, a high-profile entertainment industry trial, the ongoing case involving Diddy.
Yes, the Diddy trial. The reporting on that day highlighted testimony from Eddie Garcia. He was a security guard at a hotel.
What did he say?
He testified about getting nervous calls from Diddy, who reportedly claimed a video related to the case would ruin his career.
And the issue of non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, came up too, right? Diddy's defense argued the NDA didn't actually stop someone cooperating with law enforcement.
Right, but the prosecution had a counterpoint. They said the agreement included a requirement to notify Diddy or his company if someone got a subpoena or was contacted by authorities.
Ah, okay.
And the prosecution suggested that requiring notification could, in practice, discourage someone from voluntarily talking to the police.
There was also important testimony from a former senior executive, the CFO, at Diddy's company, Bad Boy Entertainment.
Yes, the CFO's testimony corroborated an account previously given by the mother of the singer Cassie.
Who had a relationship with Diddy.
Correct. It related to a $20,000 demand regarding explicit images.
And how is that specific detail relevant to the charges Diddy's facing? It sounds kind of specific.
Well, this testimony could be relevant to charges like extortion, or maybe demonstrating a pattern of criminal activity.
I see. Showing it wasn't just a one-off thing.
Exactly. Showing a potential broader pattern, which is key in building a racketeering case. That's one of the charges Diddy faces. And the reporting also noted that testimony from another alleged victim, just referred to as Jane, was expected soon.
Okay, so it sounds like the trial is laying out a really complex picture. Legal agreements, alleged attempts to control information, potential patterns of behavior.
That's certainly what the sources suggest is emerging through the testimony being presented.
Okay. So we've navigated the economic numbers, the personal impacts of policy, challenges to accountability. To sort of round out our look at June 4th, the news also offers some insights outside those intense political and legal arenas, spotlighting the arts, and even a surprising environmental story.
Yeah, on the arts front, sources reported on some abrupt and pretty significant cuts made by the National Endowment for the Arts, the NEA. Nearly 560 grants, totaling over $27 million, were terminated.
Wow, $27 million. Just like that. The NEA cited updating its grant-making policy priorities as the reason.
That was the official reason given. And the impact on individual organizations was really highlighted. Springboard for the Arts in Minnesota lost $150,000 for a mental health initiative, something designed to counter isolation in the community.
And the Classical Theater of Harlem lost $60,000 for its annual Outdoor Shakespeare in the Park series.
Right, a program that doesn't just entertain, but also provides jobs and supports local businesses there.
And ISKRP, that San Francisco nonprofit focused on sustainable art materials, lost $25,000 for a program teaching sustainable fashion design.
So, real impacts on specific programs. The NEA's new priority mix was described as interesting, including a focus on the upcoming 250th anniversary of American independence, AI supporting specific communities.
But the sudden shift created a lot of uncertainty, right? For groups that thought they had funding secured.
Huge uncertainty. And while some organizations are scrambling to fundraise, trying to fill the gap, the collective concern among many in the arts world is that these cuts send a message.
What kind of message?
That the government doesn't value creativity and innovation and freedom of expression, potentially posing large-scale existential threats to certain kinds of artistic work.
Though some also framed it as an exercise in democracy, prompting grassroots organizing.
True. But it seems like even seemingly small cuts can have these disproportionately large negative impacts, especially at the community level. And it's particularly tough for rural communities.
Why rural specifically?
Well, they often rely heavily on the NEA's broad reach because there just aren't as many alternative funders available in those areas.
Right, that makes sense. Okay, shifting gears completely now, we found this truly fascinating environmental story on June 4th about some unlikely ecological engineers, beavers.
Beavers.
Yeah.
Yeah, what did the sources reveal about them? Sounds kind of random.
Well, the work of scientists like ecohydrologist Emily Fairfax is really shedding light on the incredible impact of beaver wetlands. Using drone footage, she and others have shown how beaver dams create these vast protected areas.
Protected how?
Sometimes like a half-kilometer corridor with maybe 14 or 15 dams in a row.
Yeah.
These areas offer critical safety for the beavers themselves from predators.
Okay, safety for the beavers. But their impact goes way beyond that, right?
Oh, absolutely. Crucially, these dams capture sediment, and they create these lush, wet areas. And this has a significant effect during wildfires. It dampens the fire's impact and provides vital fire refuges, these patches of green, that survive even when everything around them is severely burned.
Wow. So they can act as sort of natural firefighters.
In a sense, yeah. By creating barriers and wet zones, they also act as speed bumps for rivers, delaying water flow downstream.
Which is becoming increasingly important for big river systems like Colorado, right, with climate change and drought.
Exactly. That's incredible. And it sounds like land managers are finally starting to see them differently.
Precisely. The reporting noted that land managers are increasingly viewing beavers as allies. Actual allies in restoration efforts. They're even building artificial structures called beaver dam analogs, or BDAs.
Beaver dam analogs, what on earth are those?
They're structures made of things like posts and woven branches, designed to mimic what beavers do naturally.
And why?
To speed up the recovery of degraded streams and riparian zones, those green areas along riverbanks.
And are they working?
Apparently, yes. The example cited at Muddy Creek in Wyoming showed impressive results. BDAs there have sped up recovery, doing in maybe 3 to 5 years what might take a decade or more naturally.
That's amazing. There was even a quote from a cattle rancher in Wyoming, wasn't there? Saying his cows are happier when they got a cold drink of water at 90 degrees.
Yeah. It's just a powerful example of how understanding and, well, collaborating with natural processes can lead to some surprising and really effective environmental solutions.
From complex policy and personal struggles to unexpected natural allies. June 4th really covered a lot of ground. And finally, amidst all this serious news, we also found some moments of reflection. Inspiration shared at college commencement speeches for the class of 2025.
Yeah, it's a valuable counterpoint, isn't it? Wisdom being shared with a new generation entering this, well, complicated world. Henry Winkler, for instance, urged graduates to listen to their instinct, telling them they were born to try and shouldn't let fear stop them.
Jennifer Coolidge offered that classic funny permission, suggesting they just relax for a bit, maybe until Labor Day, acknowledging they had earned a break.
Good advice. And singer Cassie's mother shared wisdom from her own mother, emphasizing that success without gratitude could make us too comfortable.
And that success without fortitude can make us corruptible. That's a powerful line, a reminder about character, not just achievement.
Definitely. PBS NewsHour anchor Amna Nawaz spoke directly to the graduates' potential impact, saying the world needs their hope and courage right now.
Yeah, she encouraged them to lift your voice above a chorus of cynics, to light your way, and to stiffen your spine when they face challenges.
And Jane Fonda highlighted the crucial role of community, advising the class of 2025 to grow a deep, solid community of people who share their values.
A source of support, safety, love, help, fun, and ultimately survival.
Yeah, in uncertain times.
And finally, Usher offered that simple, direct call to action. Now go out there and let's make it happen.
A really diverse set of voices there, offering guidance for the path ahead.
Wow. So looking back at this stack of sources covering just one day, June 4th, 2025, it's incredible how much ground we actually covered. We went from those vast, complex numbers of economic policy.
Trillions of dollars.
Right. And their potential effects on millions of Americans.
Yeah.
all the way to the incredibly personal, often frightening journeys of individuals facing immigration challenges.
Yeah, and we saw how government actions, like rescinding that health guidance, can be celebrated by some, but raise these fundamental questions for others about access to care, about individual rights. And we heard warnings from people inside the system about challenges to accountability, the rule of law, alongside private citizens pushing back against what they see as attacks on fundamental freedoms.
And then, totally flipping the script, we found those surprising insights from nature, like beavers, actually helping us fight wildfire and manage water.
Oh, no.
Right. And we received timeless advice from commencement stages, reminding a new generation about instinct, gratitude, courage, community.
What really stands out to me, looking at it all, is this constant tension throughout the day's news, this push and pull between huge, large-scale systemic forces, budgets, federal mandates, legal systems, and the actions, the resilience, the voices of individuals and communities. We saw it with Amina's community rallying around her. The arts organizations adapting after those grant cuts. Miles Taylor and Greg Rosen speaking out based on their principles. Even nature, finding ways to adapt and persist.
It really makes you pause and consider the multiple layers, doesn't it? Challenge, resistance, unexpected opportunity, all packed into just one news cycle. And perhaps it makes you think about, well, where you see yourself engaging with all these forces.
There's always more depth there when you really look closely.
Keep that curiosity sharp.